way. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce our speaker today from Chronicle. So we have Mike. He's a senior customer engineer over at Chronicle. He's a Google veteran, been here for a long time, licensed pilot, and many other honors and awards. So Mike, it's great having you this week. But in our okay Google fashion, we always have to ask a question to our guest speaker. And since you are out of New York, I have to ask, once New York opens up, what is the first thing or first restaurant you would like to go to?
You should have asked me a harder question. First of all, New Yorkers are very opinionated. So of course, a New Yorker is going to tell you like nearly immediately. So I live in Manhattan, but my favorite restaurant's actually in Queens, and it's a Southern restaurant named Queen's Comfort, and it has some of the most delectable food I've ever had: fried macaroni and cheese balls, chicken and waffles. I crave it every single day. So once they let us out of quarantine here, I'm going to shuffle over to Queens and enjoy some chicken and waffles.
That's awesome. I do love chicken and waffles as well.
Delicious, delicious.
Well, great. So again, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll kick it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you to everyone joining remotely and welcoming me into your homes. So from the intro, as you heard, Mike Willis, I'm part of our Google Cloud Enterprise Security team. So we're a team underneath Google Cloud focused on bringing the kind of best of Google security to our enterprise customers. I've been with Google almost 7 years now, so in a variety of roles, from the G Suite team to the Chrome team, to Google Cloud Platform, which I know there's been a lot of webinars on, to today with the team at Chronicle, and now focused in on enterprise security. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of where we came from and why we built this. I will warn you that every time I do these presentations, I'm working at home, my dog's sitting right at my feet. So you see Ida in the bottom right-hand of the corner. She will jump into the presentation throughout. So I do apologize, but she's cute to look at, so we'll allow her in. But one of the reasons I joined this team, and I think some of the coolest things that come out of Google, are the things that are like built like with Google-like thinking, right? So it is this concept of like, how do we take the next generation of security analytics and supercharge it with like the speed of Google? So I'm really excited to share with you what we've been doing on the Chronicle team and also in the Google Cloud Enterprise Security team. So hopefully you've all been introduced to Google Cloud. So Google Cloud has a big focus generally on security. So we have a lot of messaging around, the security of our cloud and in our cloud. So as you bring your workloads into our cloud, we want to make sure you feel like they're safe and secure, and using some of the really awesome technologies that Google Cloud offers to protect your workloads and make sure they're compliant as you're running inside a GCP. What we do in the Google Cloud Enterprise Security team is we're now externalizing a set of security services that protect you no matter where you are. So we often know cybersecurity isn't just focused on like what you're doing on premise. It's not just focused on what you're running in GCP. It is very much a multi-cloud hybrid approach that you as an organization are tasked with protecting yourself no matter where you are. Google Cloud understands that. So with the Chronicle Analytics product that we're going to talk about here today, we focus in on that kind of multi-cloud hybrid and giving you that full visibility across all of your environments, whether they're in GCP or outside of GCP. So Chronicle actually came from, the co-founders came from the security team at Google. So the genesis of where we started this product was actually out of a security incident that occurred at Google. So this is a very famous attack that happened back in the 2010 timeframe that was called the Aurora attack. So you can quickly go out there and Google it or ask your smart speaker, and you can read up everything about the Aurora attack. But what came from it was essentially a nation state actor had gotten into Google, and over a very long period of time had done a lot of discovery, slowly trickled data out from the network. So coming out of that, Google made the determination, this must never happen to us again. We must build up our defenses, right? And there's a set of security products out there in the ecosystem that focus in on this. But what it came down to is like, we have to be able to like look at everything all the time, right? And I feel like we're all tasked with this in cybersecurity, which is like this deluge of data, right? So endpoint data and cloud data, there's like this constant stream of data that we have to make sense of. And we want instant insights out of it. So when we looked out there in the ecosystem, we found often these tools were very slow or very expensive. So we decided, is there the ability for us to like take the same data analytics capability of like Google.com? So the ability for you to instantly search across, absolutely massive data sets and get insights from your data. So that's what the team set out to build internally and what we've now externalized with the Chronicle analytics tool. And then the other thing, which I think has been really exciting, we actually just recently announced a set of products around this, was our Zero Trust initiative. So Google has a famous white paper related to BeyondCorp. And that came from our other findings, which is like trust nobody inside of the network, right? That always constantly interrogate the user, what they're working on, right? Understand and find that, if a user is trusted today and suddenly that changes tomorrow, we need to be constantly looking at that traffic and trying to understand it. So BeyondCorp spurned from that, and we run full Zero Trust across Google's network, and we've now externalized that in our BeyondCorp remote access. So what you're seeing is that Google made fundamental changes stemming from Aurora, and those have now been externalized. So the kind of products that we brought to bear to better protect ourselves, things like Chronicle and BeyondCorp remote access, we're now making available to our customers as part of Google Cloud Enterprise Security. And I feel like, right, there's always like a set of events that happen and we're suddenly like, oh, we have to make changes, right? Unfortunately, sometimes in cybersecurity, that's like, oh, we're, subject to a hack and now we have to like go through and investigate and make fundamental changes, right? That's what Google experienced with Aurora. I think we're all experiencing this right now. So I took this screenshot from Forbes, which is like, what's the leading thing causing digital transformation for our customers right now, right? It's not the CEO, it's not the CTO, it's COVID, right? We're all experiencing this right now. We're all working remotely. The concept of offices and users and data have all greatly changed, right? This has caused a large ramp in the adoption of cloud, but it fundamentally has changed like our view on security. Security often is better around setting boundaries and having firewalls and having analytics around that. What do we do in this new world where the users are everywhere, right? That they're working from home, they're working on mobile devices, right? So while we've all kind of probably considered this and thought about Zero Trust initiatives and having better cloud visibility, I feel like the event we're going through right now is all making us ask these questions. How do I have better visibility into my users and my workloads, and how do I better protect those? I think that's exactly where Chronicle fits in as the kind of this cloud native solution to bring total visibility across your environment. So if you think about the kind of segment of the market that we play in, the security analytics space, there's actually lots of organizations with solutions out there, right? That this is not a brand new market that we're entering into, but we're entering it in a cloud native way, right? If you think about the traditional security analytics market, this is where you often hear about tools like SIEMs. So these are tools that essentially do like massive amount of log ingestion. They allow you to search your logs and then do analysis on them to be able to get visibility and find possible bad inside of your environment. And what we heard time and time again, and what we even experienced at Google, is that the platforms out there just weren't scaling, right? That as we want to put more and more data in, I feel like we do this all the time at Google, where users are adopting cloud and they're bringing in more cloud-based workloads. So because of that, there's more and more data that we're constantly trying to bring into our environment, and the platforms just aren't scaling. They become too expensive. They start to slow down. And that goes against what we believe in security, which is like, I need all data instantly available to detect bad and to be able to search and possibly hunt across that data set. Chronicle, you'll see as we go into the demo that we built that natively into the platform, building something at a fixed cost, right? That by thinking of things as true cloud, right? This kind of elasticity that, things should hopefully be easier and cheaper as I migrate to the cloud. We truly believe that on the enterprise security team and certainly with Chronicle. So we wanted to create kind of this flat pricing model where it doesn't become more expensive for you to put more data into the platform. And then by creating this platform where we're bringing in all of the this data, how do we constantly go across it and look for threats inside of your environment and enrich that data? That at the end of the day, it's not just about looking at your logs, it's about a lot of other pieces of data as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit as we go into the demo. But as you can see, we're essentially approaching this with the Google mindset. How do we take Google and our data analytics capabilities and unleash it on the problems of cybersecurity? And that's what's really exciting about what we've built with the Chronicle platform. And then just at a high level, some people, I've had people ask me before, like, oh, is this like an appliance that I install? Like, how do I use Chronicle? So Chronicle runs on Google's core infrastructure. So it's a data analytics platform that's meant for bringing in all this data. So imagine you have, security logs that exist on premise from your firewalls or from your web proxies. You also have security data that probably exists in Google Cloud or other clouds. So we're bringing all of that data into our platform, and then we're constantly enriching it. So we bring in things like threat intelligence to constantly look for bad on your behalf. So think of Chronicle as this massively scalable data platform for cybersecurity. And on top of that, we've layered a set of applications that allow you to do things like investigations and threat hunting. In 2020, we're excited to announce our new threat detection capabilities, where we'll actually proactively monitor all the data you're sending into the platform. So really exciting time at Chronicle and the capabilities as we continue to expand on our platform, but always going back to like the core problem of cybersecurity is taking in all this data, making sense of it, and then finding bad on your behalf. That's something that we've really focused in on with the Chronicle team.
Hey, Mike, quick question.
Absolutely.
You mentioned on-prem data. So how do you bring your on-prem data to Chronicle?
Great question. So this is something we actually had to solve for very early on, because it's not as easy as like throwing it in a briefcase and shipping it to us, right? That customers often do struggle with, like, how do I like stream data up into a cloud? So for our on-premise workloads, we actually have a set of forwarders that you install on-premise. So these run on like either a Windows server or inside of Linux. And you essentially point your on-premise devices. So imagine your internet firewalls point to that for their logs, and then the logs get securely shipped up into Chronicle. So that's a very good question that we actually tried to solve in the best way possible, which is having these set of on-premise forwarders. And then how do we connect to other clouds? Is we've actually done API integration. So the like legacy way of getting logs typically was like, I write syslog to another platform. The next generation way of like, imagine ingesting a G Suite log is you retrieve those via API, similarly inside of GCP. So we also have the ability where Chronicle's Cloud will pull those APIs and bring that data in on your behalf.
Awesome. Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Absolutely. So I'm not going to drill too much into what makes us different, because I want this all to come out as we come through this, as we go through the demo. But I want you to just understand that we wanted to think about this differently, right? That I think there's a general approach that this market takes, where it's, get logs into a big data solution, run a set of analytics over them, and do detections. We wanted to rethink that. How can we use the power of Google's analytics capabilities to fundamentally think about cybersecurity differently? So not just thinking in log files, but thinking about this kind of intelligent data fusion and having a platform that's constantly scanning and looking for threats inside of your environment. So that will absolutely come out as we jump into a demo. And I see Miss Ida again poking her head down there in the bottom right-hand corner. But let's actually go over and like prove the capabilities here, right? Does Chronicle actually do what it sets out to do in this arena? So I'm going to pivot into our web interface. So Chronicle operates, as I said earlier, on Google's core infrastructure as essentially like a software as a service, right? So you're not installing servers. You do not install this inside of like your Google Cloud projects. That this operates as a software as a service, where Google does all of the data engineering. We're doing all of the architecture. All you're tasked with as an organization is sending in your cybersecurity logs. And I'd like to make the joke that you can't build a product at Google that has a poor search experience. So when you come immediately to Chronicle's homepage, you're instantly brought to that search interface. Right, we want search to be front and center, because this is often what we're doing in security, is looking for bad or asking questions of our data. So as we go throughout the product demonstration, you're going to see lots and lots of uses of search, which is kind of front and center there. But I'm going to kind of geek out a little bit because one of my favorite parts to start with this demo is actually these counters down below. So you can actually see, and I'll blow this up a little more, the bytes ingested count. So if you quickly kind of counted all of those commas, that's actually 1.2 petabytes of security data. So inside of our Chronicle, we're like sending in our firewall logs, we're sending in our GCP logs, we're sending in our EDR logs. So all of like the security data is going into the platform. And what's really crazy and fundamentally different and very Google-like is that counter can grow over time, and in no way does it influence the speed or performance of the platform. So for an organization that has sent us 10 gigabytes of data and an organization that has sent us 2 petabytes of data, the performance and everything I'm going to do inside of Chronicle that you see today runs exactly the same. This is very different. The entire market tries to approach this in a very economical fashion, which is traditional kind of like data warehousing, right? I bring data in, I run a bunch of queries on it, and then like I let it trickle off over time, right? Like I kind of like let it go into cold storage. We sometimes get the question like, oh, did you just like build security analytics on top of BigQuery? The thing with security is that like data today is not just the most important data. It's important, but actually data from like 3 weeks ago or 3 months ago is actually just as important. It's what Google learned through its own kind of findings, which is like these threat actors, they don't do what I call like the smash and grab, right? They don't kick down your front door, come through your firewall, grab all your data in 10 minutes and go running out the front door. That often what we see with these threat actors is they get in and like, these vulnerable systems and they do a lot of discovery. What that means is that they're slowly kind of fingerprinting your network and looking around. And meanwhile, if your logs are like being forgotten about, deleted, you're not searching in them, you're missing all of those fingerprints, right? We always say it's like being at a murder scene and like you're over there like erasing all of the fingerprints in the murder scene. You need to be able to constantly analyze that data. So what that means is we set out to say all that data that comes into Chronicle needs to be instantly available for you as an organization to be able to search across, and then also for us as a kind of like a threat detection platform to constantly analyze all the data inside of there to say, I don't care whether it's 100 terabytes or 3 petabytes, we're going to always look on your behalf across that massive data set, looking for threats inside of your environment. So let's take Chronicle for a spin. So I'm going to ask what I think to be a very basic question, just because it doesn't require that I type a lot of things on my keyboard. But for anyone that's ever done data analytics before, it doesn't even have to be cybersecurity. If you ever interacted with any traditional data analytics platform, a basic question like the one I'm about to ask can actually be very difficult. So I'm going to come to our search bar. I'm going to search for one of our favorite websites, google.com. So what we're asking of Chronicle and what often cybersecurity professionals are asking is take this entity, an IP address, a host name, a file name, and I want to search across my environment to discover who's been there. And the reason this is a really tough question is that imagine like all of the different logs that an organization may be generating. You may be DNS logs and your endpoint logs and your proxy logs. Like google.com is everywhere, hopefully, inside of your environment, right? That hopefully users are constantly going there. So what that means, it's a massive data set to ask that question of. And what we're asking of Chronicle is, show me everywhere that we've seen somebody accessing google.com, whether that was on-premise or inside of our cloud environments. And I want to know the answer to that. So I'm going to hit enter. It discovers it as a valid domain inside of our system. So yep, we do see google.com inside of the system. I'm going to hit enter again. And in less than a second, the system has come back and shows me over that entire data set, 1.2 petabytes, stretching back over a year, all of the assets, all of the users inside of my environment that have accessed google.com and all of these associated subdomains. And we even start to build this nice like trend line. What we're very used to in cybersecurity is like when we ask questions, we get a bunch of log files back. I like to like pull up a Cloud Shell here and it's like, oh, you're like looking at your log files and oh, you got to look at, like auth.log. Okay, that's right. Now I want to kind of grep and like this is what we've gotten used to, which is like picking through log files to try to get insights out of that, that goes away with Chronicle. Chronicle has built this data analytics platform where it says, just bring in a bunch of cybersecurity data. We'll do all the data enrichment and data normalization. So when you ask natural questions like, I want to know who's been to google.com in my environment, we can instantly respond. And we're not just saying, oh, here's a bunch of log lines or a bunch of results to your query. We're actually answering it in a way that an analyst that would be asking, which is, well, who's been going to that inside of my environment? And as we expect, we see google.com all of the time inside of our lab environment here. So this is not to be unexpected, but imagine trying to do this on the existing security analytics tool you're doing, and not just asking this question of like, who's been to google.com today? Try asking that from like a year ago. Can you even answer that question? And that's why with Chronicle, we want to knock down those barriers. So from here, that was a like easy-ish, quote unquote, easiest question. I just asked of google.com, but like, how would we actually use this in practice? So what we're trying to do is like discover bad. Like this is often termed like threat hunting inside of the environment. I want to search for threats. I want to use the power of this search engine to search for threats inside of my environment. So we're going to take one ripped right from the headlines. So there's a lot of great threat research going on that, unfortunately, we know threat actors often use things ripped from the headlines to try to target our users. So there's been a great threat coalition that's been put together related to COVID-19. So they do a lot of threat research and understand the threats out there in the landscape, and then provide that data free of charge for you as an organization to understand, am I seeing this badness inside of my environment? So what always spurns from that is they generally give like these block lists for you to look at. Okay, here's like a set of like bad IP addresses or bad file hashes or bad host names. So I've actually already kind of pre-opened and I've gotten right to their vetted list of like bad domains and bad hashes and bad IP addresses. So let's just go to the domain list. And unfortunately, as we expect, there's lots and lots of data here. Oh, these threat actors have used lots and lots of domains, unfortunately. So let's go ahead and just to show this is not pre-canned, we're going to pick like a random one. So let's do this one right here. And what I'm trying to show you here is that, this isn't a cached query. It's not, I may ask google.com all the time. So like, let's make sure it's not something we're actually caching inside the system. So here's a brand new threat domain I've never searched for before inside of Chronicle. I hit enter. And we can see it is a valid domain. So then the next question is, okay, well, who's gone to that domain? Nobody in my environment, right? So imagine that ability that the CTO comes to you, or you're reading the New York Times and there's like this outbreak of like ransomware. And the next thing we always ask ourselves as practitioners is this affecting my organization? As you can see here, you can ask that question of Chronicle instantly and get those responses. This is giving us the advantage, right? That too often we're asking questions and waiting for answers, and that like breaks the natural flow of investigations where like I want to explore data, but like if I have to wait 8 minutes or 8 hours for a query to come back, I tend to lose my train of thought there. So this is why we built Chronicle to be hyper responsive. And again, that speed is over 1.2 petabytes of data. That could say 10 gigabytes, that could say 4 petabytes, and you could expect that same exact performance across the platform. So from here, this is, I call this kind of like the hands-on keyboard, right? This is the like Google experience. I go to Google and I ask questions, show me this recipe, or, I want to figure out my next destination I want to go flying to. But just like Google, right? Google has Google Assistant, where it's kind of looking for things on your behalf. It is surfacing interesting articles or the weather or your commute, right? It's constantly working on your behalf. What we've done with Chronicle is built the same into our platform. So it doesn't require you go in and just search for threats, so that's always available. That we can actually go to Enterprise Insights, and the engine of Chronicle is constantly searching across your data, looking for threats on your behalf. So an example of this up in the top part of our IOC domain matches is we receive these kind of like known bad indicators from some of our threat partners. So a good example of that is like, the United States Department of Homeland Security. We receive an inbound feed of the threats that they've discovered. ET Intelligence Rep List is another one that we federated with. So they're sending us a constant stream of like known bad in the world. And what we're going to do with the Chronicle engine is search on your behalf. So an example of this is like this domain right here, helpfromhome.co. It sounds like a domain somebody would be using right now as we're all working from home. This was flagged as an APT28. So that stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. These are often the threat actors that get into environment and run very slow operations to do discovery. So they're often very tough to look for inside of your environment because they tend to spread out their discovery and their attack over time. We can see the source. So who provided us this threat inside of our threat feeds? You can see it was the OS int watch list. And we actually surface which asset we discovered this on. So we're not just showing you like, oh, here's the like web proxy log that showed you this. We're actually showing you those kind of key insights as to like who was doing what when, and we can actually see it was Christina Scott's laptop. What's an interesting thing to know is this is a brand new threat. So that IOC ingest time is telling you, when did Chronicle receive this as a known threat inside of our system? So you can see we just received this 2 days ago. This is like the emerging threat that is constantly happening, right? We're constantly receiving new threats inbound to our system, but we received that and we instantly search, just like you saw me do earlier with things like google.com, right? Instantly search across that data set. Chronicle's doing that on your behalf constantly. And you can actually see right here that we discovered it inside of your environment a year ago. We've actually licensed this one to go even further back than a year. So you can actually see in some of these scenarios, we went back 2 years to discover when this was actually inside of your environment. So think about that from just a general like coverage perspective. If you think about you as an organization and like how you view your data, are you analyzing 1 year worth of cybersecurity data every minute of every single day looking for threats inside of it? The industry has generally said, I'm not going to try doing that. It's too expensive. And I just do not have enough processors for that. Like you're running queries all the time across your data. And that's where, this kind of comes from the like heart and soul of Google of like thinking about this data as always being hot and active and instantly available for you as an organization to search. And then we at Chronicle on your behalf constantly combing through that data, searching for those threat indicators. So it's a very, very different approach to looking at cybersecurity data. And frankly, this is what we wanted. We've always wanted this data to be instantly available, but it's only because of things like cloud computing and some of the data analytics capabilities that we have at Google inside of Google Cloud that we're able to bring this to fruition. So you can see here a whole list of indicators inside of our environment. So this engine's constantly running on your behalf, looking to discover that data set. So let's actually do a quick investigation of one of these indicators. And let's choose a hard one. So this one down at the bottom, which is sipapals.servehalflife.com, flagged as APT activity by the Department of Homeland Security. The indicator is about 2 years old, so we received the indicator a while ago, but you can actually see we first saw it inside of this environment 1 year ago, and we last saw it 29 minutes ago. So whatever happened to bring this known bad into our environment still exists today. So we want to ask the question, well, why? Why is this inside of my environment? So we can now click on that domain. And this looks very familiar. This was the domain search view that you saw before, where it instantly scans across that 1.2 petabytes and says, do I see this inside of your environment or not? This was already flagged, so we can see Todd Field's PC is accessing this known bad entity. It started on February 22nd, 2019. So it's almost coming up on a 1.5 year anniversary that this started on somebody's computer. And you can see it was last accessed on May 21st, 2020. So it is still occurring inside of our environment. So again, ask yourself the question, if something entered your environment a year ago, would you be able to rewind back time and go look at that data and put it together to understand why this infection happened? And again, we make that very simple with our platform, where as an investigator, I just have to click on that first access date. So let's go to February 22nd, 2019. And the system instantly rewinds back in time. So we are now looking at February 22nd, 2019. You can see that in the upper left-hand corner. We're looking at Todd Field's PC. and we're looking at a 10-minute window of data. So the system said, related to that user going to that domain, show me 10 minutes worth of event data. Bring it all together for me. And you can see in the interface, it surfaced that, oh, we retrieved 206 events that were logged to the Chronicle platform in that 10-minute window. But I'm, greedy as an investigator. I want to get more context. I'm not just interested in that 10-minute window. I really want to zoom out and understand what was the user doing over that day. So let's just scroll out on our data set. So I'm actually just using my mouse wheel. It's kind of a natural interaction. So you can see I'm like slowly zooming out on the data set. And you can now see, let's go a little further. I like to really push its button. So we are now looking at 5 hours worth of data, and the system automatically brought back 5,800 events instantly. And one thing you notice, like if you've ever dealt with any data analytics platform or you've worked on a traditional security analytics tool, to get to the point where you're like looking at a set of events related to a user, you have to write like a query, right? In a data analytics product, that's like some amount of SQL that you're writing to retrieve all of that data. Or if you've interacted with security tools, they often have like their own security query language that you have to kind of figure out. I never had to do that. We built this very natural UI to allow you to navigate through the interface and instantly do things like bring back all of that event data so you as an investigator can look at it. And then the last thing I want to do, I don't know about anyone else on the call, the last thing I want to do is click through 5,800 events to figure out what happened to this user at this time. So what we've surfaced here in the center is our prevalence view. So what we do is we take those 5,800 events and we compare them to all of the other events going on in your organization. What we're trying to do is like get rid of the noise. I'm not interested when the user is downloading Windows updates or doing things that we see all of the time inside of our environment. I want to know what was suspicious. What was the user doing that was an outlier or anomalous? And so what we do is we have this algorithm that is comparing all of these events instantly on your behalf, and then surfacing that in the central visualization that allows you to see, of these 5,800 events, what are outliers and what are ones that we see all of the time. And along the bottom here, you can see this whole kind of cluster of bubbles. You can see things like GitHub listed there. This is web traffic and events that we see all of the time inside of your environment, versus a very distinct kind of set of activity along the top here, which is considered outlier. So in this scenario, we only saw this on a single asset, which means it's a prevalence of 1 inside of our environment, versus if it was prevalence 780, that means we saw that event across 780 of your assets. So it's a very quick way to ask the question of like, help me find the outlier. This is a really hard question to ask of a data analytics platform. You're essentially saying like, take these 5,800 events and compare them to the other 7 million events that happened in a 7-day window, or maybe it's 20 million events. And I want you to do it in like 2 seconds. That's very, very tough, but that's the analytics that we built into the platform to say, help you find that kind of set of outlier data inside of there. And then the other thing we did is like, why should you have to figure out like where these logs exist and like try to gather them all up? So in our analytics capabilities built directly into Chronicle, we actually do all of the fusing of this data together in correlation. So you can see for this asset, we retrieve the user's extra hop logs and their carbon black logs. A good example, I just recently talked to a customer about this, where they were interested in, they're like, how can I see like a user's G Suite activity and their Google Cloud Platform activity, right? These are like 2 types of like Google logs, but if you think about like G Suites, like what I'm doing in Drive and what kind of emails I'm doing, and then Cloud Platform is very important. I'm spinning up workloads, I'm making changes there, right? They are 2 separate types of logs, just like we see inside of our platform with things like extra hop and carbon black. We fuse that together inside of our system in what we call our unified data model. So we can fuse these logs together. Imagine those Google Cloud Platform logs sitting in the same timeline as those G Suite logs, sitting in the same timeline as maybe the Windows event logs for that user's computer. So this is how we think. We think in timelines and investigations. We don't think in log files. So that's where our system kind of naturally fuses all of this data together in our data model and retrieves that. So again, you can just focus on the insights and not so much have to focus on like the log line, which I think we've all gotten very used to in the industry.
Hey, Mike, we're going through this demo and we're looking at different types of data. What are some of the most popular data types a customer brings into Chronicle?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we often see, I would say probably the most popular would be things like firewall logs. And I think the reason for that is because everyone runs firewalls, right? So we generally see those across like the industry. But I think the most value and probably the highest volume logs, right? So logs that generate lots and lots of data, they're very rich, right? Versus like a firewall log's like a single line and it's got some data inside of it. But actually be EDR or endpoint detection and response. These are kind of like next generation antivirus logs. So this is like my computer at home. Everything that it's doing, the processes that are starting, the network connections it's doing, like especially now given this scenario where everyone's working from home, that data is super important. Like that's going to tell you exactly what Mike Willis is doing on his computer at that time. And it generates a ton of data, right? It is often the highest volume data source that a customer will send us because you're essentially retrieving that off of all these end user assets. So that's a data source that a lot of customers say, do not try to collect. It's just too high volume, becomes too expensive to process. So as you start to kind of look at what we're doing inside the interface, fusing that data together, talked about things like G Suite logs and your GCP logs, all naturally fusing together. Endpoint logs, I think, are probably the kind of largest from a visibility standpoint because they can be very complex given the complexities of what a user could actually do on their laptop. So that entire segment of the security industry has been very, very popular. And I think given what we're all going through with everyone working from home, this often means it's the only visibility we have around end users and their activity when they're working remotely. So like a piece of malware gets installed or they're going to like a website that's a phishing website, like we want to understand all that. And sometimes EDRs are our only line of defense and visibility. So there's been a lot of like partnerships that we've built on the Chronicle side because it's such an important data set and one that often gets overlooked in security analytics platforms just because it's like too much data. And I think another really popular one, kind of staying on the topic of logs, and I've seen a lot of, as we're talking to Google Cloud customers, one of the most important security logs we hear time and time again is people want to get like the audit logs and like the VPC flow logs. So that's like network traffic analytics of like what's going on inside of your project. For anyone that's experienced like trying to collect those logs or just turning it on, it generates a ton of data. It is generating logs constantly and they're large and most customers struggle to put those somewhere, right? And again, think of those flow logs are like they're like a flight recorder of all the activity, network activity going on inside of your cloud environment. So there's a very nice home inside of Chronicle where we're receiving those flow logs. We allow you to search across that data set. And then over a full 1 year period, we're going to constantly scan across those looking for threats. So that's another good one, a very cloud native one that we've seen a large uptick in customers having interest because again, they typically just sacrifice that data set. It's too expensive. It's way too large. I can't deal with it. So I'm just going to throw it away. Great question though. So now we're getting to the point we've kind of fused all this data together on your behalf. I'm not going to get into like the nitty gritty of like what this user did at the time, but they essentially went to like a website. They downloaded this executable, so you can see kind of all this like rich data here. You can see it's very natural, right? Like it describes like user network connections and the processes they were using, right? Again, we get away from like this world, which is like looking at raw log lines. We've all been there before. It's not a great way to either debug or do security investigations. So we can have kind of this natural fusing of data that we do directly inside of our platform. And then we surface that into our timeline to make it a very natural experience that allows you as an organization to go through the timeline. And then again, if you ever want to go and take a look at the logs, they're always available. So we can see that this event was actually generated by correlating a bunch of log sources together. So things like the EDR and the web proxy logs and the DNS logs. These are logs that are very important. But again, like imagine the data analytics world, which is like normally you're like, okay, select this log from this index and select this log from this index and like try to correlate. becomes a data engineering nightmare. And that's what we've brought naturally into the platform. Is like, let us do all that. You just send us log files. That's all you have to worry about. Chronicle is going to do the data engineering work. We're going to fuse it together inside of our data model. And then we're going to use the engine to make it instantly available. And then, of course, constantly hunt for threats on your behalf inside of the platform. So from here, I think we're talking about what the team's been working on. So we announced our brand new detection engine, which launched here in 2020. So this allows for like more custom detections, right? This is what often a lot of people do inside of their log management platforms or their security tools, which is like they're writing a set of rules. So as a quick example for that, we can see here that we actually have a couple alerts that fired related to a user. So we can see this like Betty DeCaro PC. A couple of our rules fired, so possible credential theft via the Chrome Safe Passwords file, and the user did a suspicious download by an Office application. Again, that same kind of natural, I can navigate into the data set, instantly zoom in on that kind of set of events related to that user and those events firing. What I actually want to focus in on is we can see here by going, let's quickly dismiss all the noise and go up to this suspicious download by an Office application. This is such a common, like, true, we've seen this attack time and time again. This is essentially a user's like inside of a Microsoft file, there's a macro, they open the macro detonates, and it like downloads an additional stage of malware. Like this is a very easy trajectory that happens to a lot of organizations. So we can actually see that this rule fired inside of the platform. It's actually a built-in rule that comes with Chronicle. So we're going to constantly search across your data looking for this inside of that data set. I actually want to quickly drill into this and show you a little bit about the language and how we built that detection. Oops, sorry, let me go to view URL. So here you can actually see our rule manager where we go through and we start to kind of build this detection of what we're looking for inside of the Chronicle environment. What I just want to highlight here quickly is that the actual core rule here is all of 5 lines with really 3 lines of detail. And essentially what we're just telling to Chronicle is, I want to look for a network connection inside of my environment, or anytime the user is inside, let's say, the Excel application. And then while Excel is open, Excel downloads another executable, right? This is often what those macros do, is they like go out and download an additional payload. So you can see it's kind of a very natural way of asking that question. But what's very interesting here is kind of think about that, what I'm writing here, which is like this network connection. I'm looking for Excel. It's downloading an executable. There's a lot of data that I'm essentially searching for. Let's go back to the actual detection and look at the log line. So this is the log that fired that. So often in security, what we do is we write rules based upon the log. If I see this string inside of this log line, that's a detection, right? That is a very basic way of doing rules, but that's how a lot of rule engines operate. I want you to quickly look on my screen, and you can see nowhere inside of this does it say excel.exe. So this is what we're doing on the Chronicle team, is like you're asking questions of your data, but when you ask those questions, you're not asking it in like the language of a log. You're asking it as like a natural way. I want to know anytime Excel downloads another executable. Our system is fused together. So this event is actually tied to many other events where you can see there's like these process IDs. We did all that like process ID correlation on your behalf. So this is such a pain often inside of cybersecurity, which is like this data sprawls everywhere. And then too often, I think in this industry, customers and organizations have been tasked with like, you're the data engineer, you have to figure that out. I think that is the best parts of cloud, are like when you can get rid of that data engineering side of things and like just focus in on cybersecurity. So I think this is a great example of where we're looking for bad inside of your environment, but we're not necessarily doing it in a way where we're like, oh, look for this log line. That's a very tried and true way of like trying to do old stage detection. What we're actually looking for is bad behavior. So with our engine, we allow you to describe that behavior, and then we will naturally fuse together the log files to try to piece that together to see if that does exist inside of your environment. And again, imagine these detections are running across your data set. So you're a customer running in, possibly multiple clouds, hopefully Google Cloud and maybe some other cloud, right? So you have logs coming in from there, and then you have all your end users, they're generating logs as well. Chronicle is that one spot in the cloud where you can bring all that data together. The power of our data engineer is fusing that together, constantly looking for threats on your behalf, and then giving you the power and speed of Google, where you can come to this natural web-based interface to interact with that data, navigate through it, and find insights. And that's what we've been very focused with from the Chronicle team. We're in the security analytics market. We know there's a lot of people here, but we're bringing a very Google-like approach where all data is instantly available for you as a practitioner and for us on your behalf, constantly running through and doing detections and looking for bad inside of your environment, whether that environment is Google Cloud, some other cloud, or on-premise. So that wraps up our demo. I went through a whole bunch there. Glad to hear we had a couple questions along the way, but I'll pass it back to Ashley, see if we had any others come up as I went through.
No, thank you so much for going through this. I found this very insightful as well, and hopefully our viewers did. Thank you so much for going through the demo, answering our questions live, and really showing us the power of Chronicle.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate the time, everyone. And certainly feel free to follow up with your Google Cloud account team. We'd love to talk to you more about the Chronicle platform and the things we're doing in Google Cloud Enterprise Security.
Actually, we do have one question for you. Are there a list of rules that are available by default for our new systems, or do we have to define all the rules?
Great, yeah, great question. Yep, so there's actually 150 rules that come built into the platform. So we have a whole set of rules that come baked in. As part of those rules, there's actually templates as well, because I totally agree. Like, I need some reference to start with before I can write my own detections. So we give you a bunch of pre-cam ones that run automatically, and then we give you a set of templates that allow you to, kind of build your own detections on top of it. So you can do both of them. You get our pre-cam ones, and you can do your own custom detections inside of Chronicle. And that's been actually another big value add. So if I think about kind of Google Cloud customers, we often hear like, oh, well, there's like Google Cloud and Cloud Security Command Center, lots of value, right? Those systems are doing a bunch of specialized detection on things like, container-based workloads. Think of Chronicle as allowing you to do some like more custom detections, right? Or fusing those detections with detections maybe happening on people's laptops or from other clouds. So it's a great way to start to combine all that data together. It is not a replacement for Cloud Security Command Center. They actually complement each other very nicely, where we can bring all that kind of great insight from Cloud Security Command Center and fuse it with all the other cybersecurity data we're bringing into Chronicle. Any other questions?
Also, can Chronicle launch alerts?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. I mean, it's important that like if we find something, hopefully we're going to tell you about it. So yeah, there's a couple things here. There's kind of built-in notification mechanisms, right? The most basic is like, oh, send me an email if you find bad. There's actually a whole ecosystem. So if you're in cybersecurity, there's like this part of the industry called Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response, or SOAR platforms. So they're kind of almost like these alert aggregators, where they will take in alerts from something like a Chronicle. They may take in alerts from G Suite. They can bring in alerts from lots of different systems and like open a ticket or things along those lines. So we integrate there along with we do have built-in notification mechanisms. It's super important that we tell you if we discover bad inside of your environment. So absolutely built-in notification. And if you use existing kind of notification systems, things like ServiceNow, things like Slack, we have integrations there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then do you have like a brief overview of like what pricing might look like for something like Chronicle, or is that like a case-by-case basis? How does the Chronicle team do that?
So one of the approaches we want to take is like this predictable pricing model, which is like too often you hear things like events per second or like how many cores is it going to take. So the pricing is variable based upon the size of an organization. I almost describe it as like a site license, right? So we essentially license it based upon how many employees, contractors, and temporary workers you have. What we're trying to do is proxy, like, given that set of users, how much data could we estimate there? We do not want to get into the like per gigabyte pricing that I think has plagued this industry for too long. So that is exactly where I talked about that kind of, 10 gigabyte versus 10 terabyte. Like the performance is the same. We tried to keep the pricing flat there as well. So more than happy to engage, but just know like that's what we'll ask is essentially how many employees, contractors, and temporary workers do you have, and based upon that, we will put together what the site license will be.
Awesome. Thank you
Hopefully
so much for that.
that's a breath of fresh air in the industry. I think we always kind of laugh like one of our innovations is pricing, and it has nothing to do with technology, but it's actually the technology that enables us to have a nice pricing model like that.
No, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. Awesome. Well, it looks like that's all the questions that our viewers had for now. But and okay,